You guys just keep asking for the more Reddit stories. So, I'm ready with the new tale. Let's read some cool, interesting cheating wife Reddit stories. And guys, I'm trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year, and I think we can do it. So please subscribe and let's get straight into this one.
It all started on an unassuming Tuesday morning. The kind of day that slides under the radar, unremarkable and quiet, until it detonates into something unforgettable. My wife, Sophie, had always been a creature of habit. She liked her coffee black, her mornings peaceful, and her life predictable. At least, that's what I thought. We'd been married for 10 years, and though the spark wasn't what it used to be, we were comfortable, settled. Or so I believed. I'd woken up that morning with a lingering headache from the long night before. Work had been hell lately, and Sophie, well, she had been distant, brushing off my attempts to connect. I chalked it up to her workload. She'd been taking on more hours at the office recently, often coming home late, exhausted and irritable. "You're okay, right?" I asked her as she shuffled around the kitchen, looking for her keys. "I'm fine, Adam," she replied curtly, not even glancing in my direction. "Just running late. I need to call a cab, my car's still in the shop." It was a small moment, the kind you'd forget in any other story. But now, looking back, it feels monumental. She grabbed her bag and left without another word, leaving me with half a cup of coffee and the sinking feeling that something was off. By mid-afternoon, I'd nearly forgotten about the unease. Work has a way of eating at your focus like a parasite, leaving no room for personal worries. But when I got home that evening, Sophie's mood had shifted. She was unusually animated, her laughter lighter, her smile sharper. I hadn't seen her this way in months. It would have been a relief if it hadn't felt so foreign. "What's got you so cheerful?" I asked cautiously, watching her stir pasta at the stove. "Oh, nothing," she replied, brushing off the question. But there was a new spark in her eyes, something alive and electric that I couldn't place. "Work went well, that's all." She was lying. I didn't know it yet, but I could feel the edges of her deceit brushing against me like an icy draft. I just didn't know what I was walking into. The next day, I woke up earlier than usual and checked Sophie's phone while she showered. I know, it wasn't my finest moment, but the nagging feeling wouldn't let me rest. I found nothing suspicious, just the usual. Texts from her boss, a few notes from her friends. But then, I saw a notification for a rideshare app, a tip she'd left for a driver. $30? Who tips that much for a 10-minute ride? I didn't mention it to her. At least, not then. I figured I'd let it go. Maybe I was just overthinking things. Maybe the stresses of life were making me paranoid. But part of me couldn't shake the thought. Something had changed in Sophie, and I couldn't ignore it. Over the next week, she called for rides more often than usual, even when her car was back from the shop. "It's easier," she said when I asked. "The traffic's been awful. I can just relax and let someone else deal with it." "Right," I replied, trying to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. One evening, after she'd taken yet another cab, I decided to dig deeper. I created an account on the rideshare app and checked her trips. It was a small invasion of privacy, but my gut screamed that there was something worth finding. And then there it was, an unusual pattern. The same driver, multiple times. A man named Ryan. I clicked on his profile picture, late 30s, sharp jawline, bright smile. Harmless looking, but something about the frequency of their interactions set off alarms in my head. People didn't usually request the same driver unless they had a reason. I decided to follow up. It was time to see for myself what was going on. The opportunity came a few days later. Sophie had a work dinner scheduled, and she'd called for a ride, of course. I told her I'd meet her at the restaurant later. I had some errands to run. In truth, I planned to follow her. When the app notified me that Ryan had arrived to pick her up, I hopped into my own car, heart pounding. I kept my distance, trailing them through city streets until they stopped at a coffee shop, not her office, not her work dinner. A coffee shop. Sophie got out of the car, glancing around before walking inside. Ryan followed, parking the car and heading in moments later. It wasn't paranoia anymore. Something was definitely happening. What I witnessed inside that cafe changed the course of everything. Sophie and Ryan were seated in a booth near the window, leaning close, their laughter muted by the glass. Her hand brushed his arm as she spoke, and he smiled in a way that made my stomach churn. There was no mistaking the chemistry between them. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, watching the woman I'd shared a decade with, our mornings, our nights, our dreams, flirting with a man I didn't know. It was betrayal in its rawest form, and I felt it deep in my chest. I stayed until they left, still rooted in place. When I finally drove home, my mind raced with questions I wasn't ready to confront. How long had this been going on? Why? And most importantly, what was I going to do about it? As the door to our home clicked shut behind her later that night, Sophie greeted me like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending otherwise. The morning after seeing Sophie with Ryan in that cafe, I woke up early, unable to shake the image of them together. My wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had been laughing, leaning in, and touching another man like I was nothing more than a shadow in her life. But I wasn't about to explode, not yet. I needed more. If this was what it looked like, then it was deliberate, premeditated. And if Sophie thought I was just some clueless husband, she was about to find out otherwise. I played it cool for the next few days, watching her closely without letting on that I knew anything. It wasn't easy. Every time she smiled at me, touched my shoulder, or called me honey, I had to bite back the anger bubbling under my skin. It was as if I were living with a stranger, someone wearing Sophie's face but betraying everything we had built. I started doing some digging. I went through her rideshare app again, noting every trip she'd taken with Ryan. It wasn't just a few rides, it was dozens stretching back weeks. Morning rides to work, pickups after dinners, random midday outings. And always the same driver. My next step was to find out who Ryan really was. Late one night, while Sophie was showering, I slipped into her office and checked her laptop. She rarely logged out of anything. Her passwords were saved, her tabs always left open. It didn't take long to find an email thread with the rideshare company. At first, it seemed innocent. She'd written to customer service about a wonderful driver, and asked if it was possible to schedule rides exclusively with him. My stomach tightened as I read the glowing praise. Ryan is so kind and attentive, makes me feel comfortable every time, such great conversations. Conversations. Comfortable. Those words stuck in my head like thorns. I kept scrolling and found a string of emails with Ryan himself. They weren't frequent, but they were personal. Thanks for the ride earlier, one read. You always brighten my day. His reply came minutes later. Anything for you, Sophie. Let me know when you need me next. Another email caught my eye. It was short but damning. I've never felt this way before. I know it's wrong, but I can't stop thinking about you. It wasn't signed. But it didn't need to be. I copied every email onto a flash drive and tucked it into my pocket. I was shaking, my vision blurring as rage filled me. When Sophie stepped out of the bathroom, her hair damp and her skin glowing, she looked at me with that familiar smile. But I couldn't see my wife anymore. All I saw was a liar. The next day, I decided to test her. Let's do something this weekend, I said over breakfast. It's been a while since we spent time together. Sophie looked up from her coffee, her expression guarded. This weekend? I think I have plans Saturday. What kind of plans? I asked casually, but my heart was pounding. She hesitated, just for a second. Lunch with Sarah, she said. We haven't caught up in ages. Sarah. Her best friend. It was a good cover, too good. Sarah and I weren't close, but we'd known each other long enough that I could call her bluff. Sounds great, I said. I'll text Sarah and join you guys. It's been ages since we all hung out. For a moment, Sophie froze. Then she smiled tightly. Actually, it's more of a girls-only thing. You wouldn't want to sit through that. Right, I said, my voice clipped. Of course. She was lying. I knew it. And now I had to find out where she'd really be. Saturday morning came, and Sophie was in a whirlwind of preparation. She wore her favorite dress, the blue one that hugged her figure just enough to be alluring without being obvious. She even put on perfume, the kind she usually saved for special occasions. Have fun with Sarah, I said as she grabbed her bag. She smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. Thanks. Don't wait up. The second she left, I was in my car. I'd installed a GPS tracker on her phone the night before, hidden in the guise of a harmless family locator app. I watched as her location pinged a few blocks away, not Sarah's house, but a small park near downtown. I parked discreetly and waited. A few minutes later, Ryan's car pulled up. He stepped out, wearing jeans and a crisp white shirt, looking every bit the casual charmer. Sophie climbed into the passenger seat, and they drove off. I followed at a distance, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. They stopped at a lakeside cabin, remote, quiet, the perfect place for whatever this was. I waited in my car, parked far enough that they wouldn't notice me but close enough to watch. Sophie and Ryan got out, laughing as they carried a picnic basket toward the cabin's porch. When she leaned in to kiss his cheek, something inside me snapped. But I didn't confront them. Not yet. I stayed there for hours, watching from a distance as they disappeared into the cabin. I saw shadows moving through the windows, their figures close, intimate. By the time they emerged, the sun was setting, and Sophie's hair was mussed, her smile radiant in a way that made me sick. When they drove off, I didn't follow. I couldn't. My mind was a storm of fury, betrayal, and heartbreak. But I knew one thing: this wasn't going to end quietly. That night, Sophie came home and kissed me on the cheek as if nothing had happened. I played along, pretending I hadn't just witnessed her spend the day with another man. How was lunch with Sarah? I asked, my tone neutral. She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Oh, it was great, she said. We had so much to catch up on. Glad to hear it, I replied, forcing a smile. But inside, I was planning my next move. Sophie thought she could get away with this. She thought I was blind, oblivious. But she had no idea what was coming. The more I watched Sophie's every move, the more I began to see her for who she truly was. Or maybe, who she had become. The once shy and reserved woman who couldn't tell a convincing lie if her life depended on it had transformed into someone I barely recognized. Her duplicity wasn't just shocking, it was masterful. The morning after her lunch with Sarah, Sophie was as cheerful as ever, humming while she prepared breakfast. I sat across from her at the table, nursing my coffee and staring at her as though I was seeing her for the first time. Did you sleep well? She asked, not even looking up from her plate. Like a rock, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. She smiled, blissfully unaware of the fact that I'd spent the better part of the night replaying everything I'd seen at the cabin. I had given myself two options: confront her immediately, or wait and gather more evidence. The latter felt like the smarter move. I wanted to leave no room for denial, no wiggle room for her to twist the truth. So I smiled back at her. What about you? Was Sarah's place comfy? She froze for the briefest of moments, her fork pausing mid-air. Then, just as quickly, she recovered. Oh, you know Sarah. She has that amazing guest room with the plush mattress. I almost didn't want to leave. Her ease in lying was infuriating. But I nodded and let it slide, all the while imagining the countless ways I'd make her pay. For the next few weeks, I kept my distance emotionally, letting Sophie dig herself deeper into her hole. I'd perfected the art of pretending everything was fine while quietly gathering ammunition. I tracked her phone every time she left the house, taking note of the increasingly frequent trips to meet Ryan. She was clever, though. They rarely went to the same place twice, choosing out-of-the-way coffee shops, secluded parks, and even hiking trails. Once, she even claimed she was volunteering at an animal shelter when I knew full well she was spending the afternoon in Ryan's car, parked on a quiet road just outside of town. I kept my cool, but each discovery felt like a knife twisting in my gut. The final piece of the puzzle came one Friday evening when Sophie claimed she had to stay late at the office. I knew better. I'd seen the message she sent to Ryan earlier that day. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Same spot as last time?" I followed her to a motel on the outskirts of the city, its neon sign flickering ominously in the night. She pulled into the lot, parked, and disappeared inside. Moments later, Ryan's car arrived, and he joined her. This was it. The confirmation I needed. I snapped pictures of them entering the room, making sure to capture their faces clearly. But even as I sat there, documenting her betrayal, part of me felt hollow. What was the endgame here? Did I want revenge? Justice? Or just answers? When Sophie returned home that night, she found me waiting in the living room, the lights dimmed and the evidence spread out on the coffee table. "Oh, you're still up?" she asked, feigning nonchalance as she set her bag down. "I thought you'd be in bed by now." I didn't respond, just gestured for her to sit. She hesitated, her smile faltering as she took in my expression. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice wavering. I slid the photos toward her. "Care to explain these?" Her face went pale as she picked up the images. For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes darting between the photos and me. Then, like a cornered animal, she lashed out. "Why were you following me?" she snapped, slamming the pictures down. "Do you have any idea how invasive this is?" "Invasive?" I laughed bitterly. "You've been sneaking around with some cab driver behind my back, and you think I'm the one who crossed the line?" She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Instead, she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as she started to cry. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she choked out. "I didn't. I don't even know how it got this far." "Bullshit," I spat, my anger finally breaking through. "You've been lying to me for months, Sophie. Meeting him in secret, sneaking off to motels, God knows what else. Don't stand there and tell me you didn't mean for it to happen. You made a choice." "I was lonely," she shouted, her voice cracking. "You've been so distant, so wrapped up in your own world. I felt invisible, Adam. Ryan, he made me feel seen again." I stared at her, my hands clenched into fists. "So your solution was to destroy everything we've built? To humiliate me? To throw away 10 years of marriage for some guy who drives a damn cab?" She flinched at my words, her tears falling harder now. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "Well, congratulations," I said coldly. "You succeeded." Sophie begged me to give her another chance, to let her explain, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. I told her I needed time to think and walked out of the house, leaving her sobbing on the living room floor. As I drove aimlessly through the night, my mind raced with possibilities. I could file for divorce, expose her to everyone we knew, or confront Ryan directly. But none of it felt satisfying. No, if Sophie thought she could walk away from this unscathed, she was wrong. I wasn't just going to end things. I was going to ruin her. After leaving Sophie sobbing in the living room, I spent hours driving aimlessly, the darkness outside mirroring the storm brewing inside me. Her betrayal wasn't just an emotional wound, it was a calculated insult. She had lied to my face, played me for a fool, and destroyed the trust that had taken a decade to build. But if she thought she could walk away from this unscathed, she was sorely mistaken. I wasn't going to just confront her and move on. No, I was going to dismantle her life piece by piece, the same way she had dismantled our marriage. The first step in my plan was to gather more ammunition. The photos and the tracker logs were solid, but I wanted airtight proof, something she couldn't talk her way out of if it came to that. I decided to install cameras in the house while Sophie was at work, focusing on areas where she typically spent time on her phone: the kitchen, the living room, and her home office. It wasn't hard to do. Sophie rarely touched the tech in our house, leaving all the gadgets and setups to me. By the time she came home that evening, none the wiser, I already had access to every word she typed, every call she made, and every video chat she initiated. It didn't take long for the cameras to bear fruit. Within days, I caught her on the phone with Ryan, whispering sweet nothings as if she were a lovesick teenager. "I can't stop thinking about you," she murmured one evening while lounging on the couch, her voice soft and intimate. "When can I see you again?" The camera captured everything: her flushed cheeks, the way she twirled her hair, the smile that hadn't graced her face in months when she was with me. Ryan's voice crackled faintly through the speaker. "Soon, baby. I'll make it work. I can't wait to hold you again." Hearing those words, I clenched my fist so hard my nails bit into my palms. But I didn't make a sound. Not yet. The second step in my plan was to hit her where it hurt: her reputation. Sophie prided herself on being the perfect wife, the kind of woman who juggled work, social obligations, and home life effortlessly. She had a tight-knit circle of friends, a job where she was respected, and a family who adored her. I wasn't going to let her keep that facade intact. I started with her friends. Using the videos and messages I'd collected, I crafted an email that would turn heads. The subject line was simple: the truth about Sophie. I included just enough evidence to make my point: photos of her with Ryan, snippets of their messages, and a brief explanation of how she'd been lying to everyone who thought they knew her. I scheduled the email to be sent to her closest friends at the same time she had a dinner planned with them. Her reaction when she got home that night was priceless. She stormed into the house, her face red with anger and humiliation. "What the hell did you do, Adam?" she screamed, throwing her purse onto the floor. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said calmly, barely glancing up from the book I was pretending to read. She shoved her phone in my face, the screen showing the email I'd sent. "This? You sent this to my friends? Are you insane?" "Insane?" I asked, standing up and meeting her glare. "Insane is betraying the person who's spent 10 years building a life with you. Insane is thinking you could cheat and get away with it." She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "You humiliated me, Sophie. Consider this just the beginning." The fallout was immediate. Her friends, once fiercely loyal, were stunned and disgusted. I hadn't revealed everything. I was saving some for later, but what I'd sent was enough to shatter. One by one, her friends stopped answering her calls, leaving her isolated and desperate. But I wasn't done. The third step of my plan was to target her work. Sophie had always been proud of her job. She'd climbed the corporate ladder through sheer determination and hard work. But the emails between her and Ryan contained more than just flirtation. They revealed that she'd been sneaking out of the office during work hours to meet him, sometimes even using company resources to do so. I compiled these emails into a neat little folder and sent them anonymously to her boss. I knew they wouldn't fire her immediately. They'd have to investigate first. But I also knew Sophie's reputation at work would be irreparably damaged. A week later, she came home looking pale and shaken. "They've put me on probation," she muttered, collapsing onto the couch. "Someone sent my boss emails. Private emails." "That's terrible," I said, feigning sympathy. "Who would do such a thing?" She shot me a sharp look, but she didn't say anything. She couldn't. As Sophie's world began to crumble, I turned my attention to Ryan. He wasn't going to get away unscathed either. I tracked down his social media profiles, finding pictures of him with friends and family, and discovered that he wasn't quite the carefree bachelor Sophie believed him to be. He had a fiancée. Her name was Claire, and she was tagged in countless photos with him, her captions filled with love and admiration for the man she thought she was going to marry. It didn't take much to find her contact information. I sent her a polite but direct message. "Hi Claire, I thought you should know what Ryan's been up to. Attached are some photos and messages that might interest you. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but I think you deserve the truth." A few days later, Sophie confronted me again, her eyes wild with anger. "Claire dumped Ryan," she hissed, her voice trembling. "He says it's my fault." "Oh, I'm sorry," I said with mock sincerity. Did your little fantasy life not work out the way you planned? Her face crumpled, tears spilling over as she collapsed into a chair. For the first time in weeks, I saw the cracks in her armor, the realization that she'd lost everything. Why are you doing this to me? She sobbed. Because you destroyed me first, I replied coldly. And now you're going to feel exactly what I felt, only worse. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Sophie was unraveling. She had always been a picture of composure, the woman who kept everything neat and in control, who made life look easy. But now, the cracks were too wide to hide. I watched her stumble through her days, trying desperately to salvage the pieces of her shattered life. It would have been satisfying if it hadn't also been so pathetic. After the fallout at her job, Sophie spent most of her time at home. The woman who once walked with her head held high now skulked around the house in sweatpants, her face pale, her hair unkempt. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, her words were clipped and filled with venom. "You've destroyed me," she muttered one evening as we sat in silence. "I have nothing left." "Destroyed you?" I repeated, leaning back in my chair. "No, Sophie. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone saw it." Her eyes flashed with fury, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. Not after everything I'd exposed. Ryan, for his part, had completely disappeared from Sophie's life. After I contacted his fiancée, Claire, he must have realized the mess he was in and decided to cut his losses. I'd overheard Sophie trying to call him several times, her voice trembling with desperation. "Please, Ryan. I need to talk to you. Just call me back." The calls always went unanswered. Once, I caught her crying quietly in the kitchen, her phone clutched in her hand. I almost felt a pang of pity. Almost. As Sophie crumbled, I began to rebuild my own life. I hired a divorce attorney, carefully documenting every piece of evidence I had against her. I wanted this separation to be swift and absolute, leaving her with as little as possible. "I'm not letting her take a damn thing from me," I told my attorney during one of our meetings. "She can walk away with her clothes and whatever's in her purse. That's it." The attorney, a sharp woman with a no-nonsense attitude, nodded approvingly. "With the evidence you've gathered, we can make that happen. Judges don't take kindly to infidelity." The divorce papers were ready within weeks, and handing them to Sophie was a moment I'll never forget. She was sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the television, when I dropped the stack of documents on the coffee table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Divorce papers," I said simply. "Sign them whenever you're ready." Her face crumpled, her eyes filling with tears. "Adam, please. I know I messed up. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over." "Start over?" I cut her off, my voice sharp. "You didn't just make a mistake, Sophie. You made a series of deliberate choices to betray me. Over and over again. There's no starting over from that." She sobbed, clutching the papers to her chest as if they might somehow save her. "I'll do anything," she whispered. "Just don't do this." For a brief moment, I hesitated. There was a time when I would have given anything to hear her say those words. But now, it was too late. "Sign the papers," I said coldly. "That's the only thing you can do for me now." As the divorce proceedings moved forward, I turned my focus to ensuring that Sophie's lies didn't ruin anyone else's life, not even in the aftermath. I reached out to her boss, her remaining friends, and even her family, sharing just enough of the story to ensure they understood why I was leaving her. Her parents were devastated. Sophie had always been their golden child, the one who could do no wrong. When I told them about her affair, they were stunned. "We had no idea," her mother said quietly, tears streaming down her face. "This isn't the Sophie we raised." "No, it's not," I agreed. "But it's who she's become." With every step I took, Sophie fell further into despair. She lost her job completely after the probation period ended, and her friends, those who hadn't already distanced themselves, started avoiding her entirely. I could tell she was trying to rebuild her connection with Ryan, but every attempt failed. One evening, I overheard her screaming into her phone. "Why are you doing this to me?" she cried. "I gave up everything for you, and now you won't even talk to me?" I almost laughed. She gave up everything for him? No, she'd thrown everything away long before he walked into the picture. As the weeks turned into months, Sophie became a shell of her former self. She barely ate, barely slept, and spent most of her time locked away in her room. The divorce was nearly finalized, and I was already making plans to move out of the house we'd once shared. But I wasn't done with her yet. The final step in my revenge was simple but devastating. I filed a petition to ensure that Sophie wouldn't receive alimony, citing her infidelity as the reason. My lawyer presented the evidence to the court: photos, messages, videos, and the judge ruled in my favor. Sophie wouldn't see a dime of my money. When I told her the news, her reaction was predictable. "You're leaving me with nothing?" she shouted, her voice hoarse from crying. "How am I supposed to survive?" "That's not my problem," I replied, my voice ice cold. "You wanted a fresh start, Sophie. Here it is." The day I moved out, Sophie didn't even come to the door to see me leave. I found her sitting in the corner of the living room, staring blankly at the wall. "Goodbye, Sophie," I said as I stepped outside. She didn't respond. As I drove away, a strange sense of peace washed over me. I had loved Sophie once, but that love was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. She had destroyed everything we had, and in the process, she had destroyed herself. And I was finally free. The silence in my new apartment was a sharp contrast to the storm that had been my life just weeks before. For the first time in months, maybe years, I could breathe. There were no lies hanging in the air, no betrayal festering beneath the surface. I was alone, yes, but I wasn't lonely. Not anymore. Sophie, on the other hand, had descended into chaos. The news of her affair, and the fallout, had spread like wildfire among our social circles, thanks in part to my calculated revelations. She'd become a pariah, someone people whispered about but never invited out. From what little I heard through mutual acquaintances, she'd moved into a rundown apartment on the edge of town. No job, no friends, no Ryan. Exactly where she deserved to be. I didn't hear from Sophie directly for a while after the divorce was finalized. The silence was a relief. I'd blocked her number, removed her from social media, and left no avenues for her to contact me. But despite my efforts to erase her from my life, traces of her kept appearing in unexpected ways. One afternoon, as I was leaving the gym, I ran into Sarah, Sophie's former best friend. Her face lit up when she saw me, but there was a hint of hesitation in her expression. "Adam," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's been a while." "Hey, Sarah," I replied, trying to sound casual. "How've you been?" She shrugged. "Good, I guess. Better than Sophie, from what I've heard." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" Sarah leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "She's not doing well, Adam. She called me a few weeks ago, begging for a place to stay. I couldn't say yes, not after everything that happened." I nodded, feeling a flicker of satisfaction. She made her bed. Now she has to lie in it. Sarah's expression softened. "I get it. I do. But I don't know, Adam." She sounded broken. Like she didn't have anyone left. Her words lingered with me longer than I expected. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy, to remember the woman I had once loved. But the other part, the part still scarred from her betrayal, pushed those feelings aside. Sophie's pain wasn't my problem anymore. Weeks turned into months, and life began to normalize. I threw myself into work, reconnected with old friends, and even started going on dates again. Nothing serious, just casual dinners and conversations that reminded me there was life beyond Sophie's lies. One evening, after a particularly good date, I came home to find a letter slipped under my apartment door. The handwriting on the envelope stopped me cold. It was Sophie's. I debated throwing it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. I tore the envelope open and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Her words were shaky, scribbled in uneven lines. Adam, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I'm sorry. For everything. For lying, for betraying you, for ruining what we had. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I needed you to know that I regret it all. Ryan was a mistake. I see that now. He used me, Adam, and when everything fell apart, he disappeared without a second thought. I lost my job, my friends, my family, and it's all my fault. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I destroyed it. I just wanted you to know that I'll carry that regret with me for the rest of my life. Sophie. I stared at the letter for a long time, the words blurring as anger and sadness fought for dominance in my chest. Regret? That's all she had to offer? It was too little, too late. Despite myself, I couldn't shake the letter. Over the next few days, I found my thoughts drifting back to Sophie. What was she doing now? Was she truly as broken as she claimed, or was this just another manipulation, another way to draw me back in? I resolved not to let it consume me. Sophie had already taken enough of my time and energy. I wouldn't let her take any more. One evening, while out with friends, I overheard someone mention Sophie. My ears perked up, though I pretended not to care. She's a mess, the woman said, shaking her head. She's working at that diner on Main Street now. Barely makes enough to cover rent. I felt a pang of something, not pity exactly, but a strange sense of finality. Sophie, who had once been so proud, so confident, was now scraping by in a dead-end job. It was the ultimate fall from grace. And yet I couldn't bring myself to feel triumphant. She'd brought this on herself, yes, but there was no satisfaction in seeing her reduced to nothing. A few weeks later, I found myself driving down Main Street late at night. I didn't plan to stop, I wasn't even sure why I was there. But as I passed the diner, I caught a glimpse of Sophie through the window. She was wiping down tables, her face drawn and tired. For a moment, I considered going inside. Saying something, anything. But what was there to say? What could I possibly offer her now? Instead, I kept driving, leaving Sophie and all the pain she had caused me in the rearview mirror. Life continued to move forward, as it always does. I sold the house Sophie and I had shared, invested the money into a new business venture, and slowly began to feel like myself again. As for Sophie, I didn't hear from her again after the letter. Occasionally, I'd catch a snippet of gossip or see a post online that mentioned her, but she was no longer a part of my life. She was just a ghost, a cautionary tale of what happens when you let selfishness destroy everything. In the end, I wasn't sure if I'd won. Revenge had been sweet in the moment, but it hadn't filled the void Sophie's betrayal had left. Still, I had survived. I had rebuilt. And maybe, in time, that was all the victory I needed. Months passed, and Sophie became a distant memory. My life was stabilizing, new routines, new connections, and slowly, a new version of myself. I wasn't the man I'd been when Sophie was in my life, but I wasn't entirely someone else either. Healing is funny like that. It's not about erasing the scars but learning to live with them. And then, Sophie reappeared. It was a Saturday morning, crisp and quiet. I was sipping coffee on the balcony of my new apartment when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it but picked up out of curiosity. Adam, a familiar voice said, tentative and broken. It took me a moment to realize it was Sophie. I told you not to contact me again, I said sharply, already on edge. I know, she said, her voice trembling. But I need your help. I barked a laugh, the bitterness rising unbidden. Help? From me? After everything you've done? Please, Adam, she whispered. I'm in trouble. For a brief moment, I considered hanging up. But something in her voice, a fragility I hadn't heard before, stopped me. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in a neutral part of town. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Sophie, who had once been poised and polished, now looked worn and gaunt. Her hair was limp, her clothes loose, and her eyes hollow. She glanced up as I approached, her face a mixture of relief and shame. "You've got 10 minutes," I said, sitting down across from her. She clasped her hands together, her knuckles white. "I know I don't deserve this, Adam. But I didn't know who else to turn to." "Cut to the chase," I said coldly. She swallowed hard, her gaze darting around the room as if she expected someone to appear at any moment. "It's Ryan," she said finally. "He's been harassing me." My eyebrows shot up. "Ryan? As in the guy you blew up our marriage for?" "Yes," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "After everything fell apart with Claire, he blamed me. Said I ruined his life? At first, he just ignored me, but then he started showing up at my apartment. Sending messages. Threatening me." I stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or scream. "And what exactly do you expect me to do about it?" "I don't know," she said, her voice cracking. I don't feel safe." "I thought maybe you could stop," I said, holding up a hand. "You thought maybe I could what, Sophie? Save you? After everything you've done to me?" Her tears spilled over, her shoulders trembling. "I made a mistake, Adam. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. But you're the only person I've ever trusted. Please, I'm begging you." I sat back, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to walk out, to let her deal with the mess she'd made on her own. But another part, a quieter, angrier part, saw an opportunity. "You want my help?" I said finally, my tone icy. "Fine. But there are conditions." Her eyes widened with hope. "Anything." Over the next week, I dug into Ryan's life. It didn't take long to find dirt, unpaid debts, a history of shady dealings, and an incident involving vandalism at a former employer's property. Armed with this information, I confronted him directly. We met in a dimly lit parking lot, the tension thick in the air. Ryan, smug and confident, leaned against his car as I approached. "What's this about?" he asked, smirking. "I want you to leave Sophie alone," I said, my voice steady. He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Why? You still pining for her, buddy?" "No," I said, stepping closer. "But I don't take kindly to men who threaten women. Especially ones who've already destroyed enough lives." His smirk faltered. "You don't scare me." I smiled then, a cold, calculated smile. "You should. Because if you don't back off, I'll make sure every skeleton in your closet sees the light of day. Those debts you owe? Those charges you've dodged? I'll make sure they catch up to you." For a moment he hesitated, his bravado cracking. Then he scoffed. "You're bluffing." "Try me," I said, stepping even closer. "I've got nothing to lose, Ryan. But you? You've got everything to lose. Walk away from Sophie. Now." He must have believed me because Sophie never heard from him again. She called me a few days later, her voice shaky with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "Don't," I replied, my tone flat. "We're even." That was the last time I spoke to Sophie. In the months that followed, I heard snippets about her here and there. She'd moved to a new city, taken a job at a small bookstore, and was trying to rebuild her life. Whether she succeeded or not, I didn't care. I had my own life to live, free of her lies and betrayals. And for the first time in years, I felt at peace. The years that followed Sophie's exit from my life were quieter, calmer, and infinitely better. I no longer walked on eggshells, no longer worried about what lies might be unfolding behind my back. I had my own space, my own rhythm, and for once, I felt in control. But every so often, Sophie's ghost lingered in the background, a faint echo of a life I'd left behind. I had no intention of ever seeing Sophie again. After our final interaction, I'd resolved to put her and everything she represented behind me. I even stopped keeping tabs on her, which, for a time, had been a morbid form of comfort. She no longer mattered. Then, one random Thursday evening, she reappeared. I was at a restaurant with friends, celebrating the closing of a big deal at work. The atmosphere was lively, filled with the clinking of glasses and bursts of laughter. I was mid-conversation when I felt a tap on my shoulder. "Adam," a voice said quietly. I turned and froze. There she was, Sophie. She looked better than she had the last time I'd seen her. Healthier, more composed, though there was still a hint of weariness in her eyes. She was dressed simply, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice tentative. I glanced at my friends, who were now watching with interest, and then back at her. "Make it quick." We stepped outside, the cool night air biting at my skin. I crossed my arms and stared at her, waiting. "I wasn't sure if I should approach you," she began. "But I couldn't just walk away without saying this." I sighed. "Sophie, whatever it is, I don't need to hear it. Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Just let me say my piece." Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment I saw the Sophie I'd married, the woman I'd once loved, the one who had shared my dreams and my life. But I quickly reminded myself of everything that had come after. "Fine," I said, my tone clipped. "Talk." She took a shaky breath. "I know I've apologized before, but it's never felt like enough. What I did to you, it's something I'll regret for the rest of my life. I ruined everything. Our marriage, our friendship, your trust. And I've spent every day since trying to figure out how to live with that." I said nothing, my expression unreadable. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," she continued. "I know I don't deserve it. I needed you to know that I've changed. That I'm not the same person who hurt you." "Good for you," I said flatly. "But what do you want from me, Sophie? Closure? A pat on the back for finally figuring out you screwed up?" Her face crumpled, but she held her ground. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. And that I hope you found happiness, even if it's without me." I stared at her, the anger and pain from years past bubbling up but unable to take hold. Instead, I felt nothing. "That's all I ever wanted, Sophie," I said finally. "For you to admit what you did and stop pretending it wasn't your fault. But you're right, we're done. Whatever this is supposed to fix, it's too late." Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded. "I understand." "Good," I said, turning to walk back inside. "Goodbye, Sophie." As I rejoined my friends, I felt a strange sense of finality. Sophie's words hadn't erased the past, but they had closed the door on it. She was no longer a lingering ghost, no longer a source of anger or pain. She was just someone I used to know. Months later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Sophie had moved again, this time to a small town up north. She'd taken a job at a non-profit and was living a quiet, unremarkable life. As for me, life continued to improve. I started dating someone new, a woman named Claire, not that Claire, who was kind, honest, and everything Sophie hadn't been. Our relationship was built on trust, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could truly open myself up to someone. One evening, as Claire and I sat on the couch, she asked about my past relationships. I hesitated for a moment, then told her the truth. "There was someone," I said. "She hurt me in ways I never thought possible. But she also taught me what I deserve, and what I'll never accept again." Claire smiled softly, taking my hand. "Well, I'm glad she's out of the picture. Because now you're here, with me." And for the first time in years, I realized she was right. Sophie was gone. Her betrayal, her lies, they were just part of my story, not the end of it. I'd survived, I'd healed, and now, I was finally free to live again.
Oh my god. Another really good one. I really hope you enjoyed this Reddit story video. I had a great time reading this. If you want more of this kind of content, just leave a comment, let me know. Follow my channel. I'm really trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year. And we can do it. It's going to happen, guys. Thank you so much. Now, everybody have a great night and have a sweet dreams.